Today we're talking about how to write a CV. And we need to know the difference. What's a CV and what's a resume? A CV or a resume? Well, there's really no difference. There are some small differences. But in real life, these differences are not important. So it's really the same thing. Today, we're going to be talking about how to present your professional achievements, what you have done in your life and in your studies and in your profession, how you can put this on paper and you can tell somebody about it. And usually we need to write a CV or a resume when we want to apply for a job, when we want to apply to a university, we want to apply for a grant, some money from the government or money from a big organization. We might, there are some different situations when we might use a CV or a resume. Really, they're almost exactly the same thing. And I think it's important to just, today we're going to call it CV. CV is an abbreviation, right? It's CV, and this is curriculum vitae. This is Latin. It's not English. So even English speakers don't really remember what it means, and they just say CV. So you can tell someone, send me your CV or send me your resume, or I'll send you my CV or I'll send you my resume. So what are the most important parts of this? Well, first of all, yeah, we talked about the difference. And so for most places in the world, it's going to be the same thing. In the United States, sometimes a CV is a little different than resume, but in most places in the world, it's the same thing. So in the United States, a CV is usually longer, bigger than a resume. So it's less specific. Let's say that. Like in a resume, if I'm applying for a job to be a teacher, and I say that I have a certificate to write computer code, it's not really connected to me being a teacher of English, right? So should I put this in my resume or not? So in a resume, maybe I wouldn't put this, but in my curriculum vitae, in my CV, I might put everything that I've done, right? So a CV would be bigger. Generally, the difference is not important. Okay. Another big difference, I think, is in American English, most people say resume. In American English, most people say resume, but in most other places in the world, people say CV. So this is also a little confusing. Just think of them as the same. Okay, so today I'm going to be sharing some advice about writing CVs and resumes. And this advice is based on, I'm American, and so this is like an American perspective, American view of how CVs and resumes should look. Also, I hire people, I give jobs to people. So I'm also giving you perspective of a person who looks at resumes and CVs. Great. So is it important? Is it even important to write a CV or a resume? Yes, it is. It's very important for you to just be able to present the things that you have done in your life, or the things that you have done that are important for the thing that you're applying for, the position or the grant or the school, right? So whatever you are applying for, it's important that you can show that you can talk about yourself and explain that you know something, right? This is what a resume or a CV should do. Another thing that it should do is it should help the person who's hiring, the person who's looking for looking at the piece of paper. It should help them understand very quickly and very clearly if you are the right person for this thing or not. Right? If it's very confusing and they have to read lots of details to try to understand, then maybe they won't spend enough time to get that information, and they won't ever learn about what you did. So it needs to be specific. It needs to be concise. What do these words mean? So specific means that we want to say exactly what the position was. A good example of this is usually when we talk about our previous jobs or studies, we include not only the name of the company, or we have our position, we have the name of the company, we have maybe the address or phone number or email address of the company. We might have our supervisor, our boss, and their name and their phone number, their email address. We might include all of this information about where we worked before, so that it makes it very easy for the person who's reading to say, okay, not only they work there, but also it's very easy to contact someone and ask questions about them. Maybe they never call. Maybe they never write them or call them and ask, right? But it would be easy for them. So they will probably like this more because they're looking at the piece of paper and they have to think about how they will check this information, right? And now you've made it easy for them. Concise. Concise means that it means short. It means brief. It means that it includes everything that it needs. It includes everything we need without extra words, right? It's the smallest version of what we need. Something that's concise does this. It gives us exactly what we need and nothing extra. So it's very direct, right? Great. Another thing that we should do is at the beginning of our resume or CV, we should make a statement. We should say who we are. Like we should write some kind of heading, right? Usually a CV or a resume has different sections, and we might separate this into like work history, or we might say employment history, work history, or employment history. It's the same. Yeah. We might include our education, right? That might be another section, education. We might include professional achievements. Professional achievements. We might include awards, certificates, some people even include interests. Like some people might say, I play chess, I play tennis. Some people might include, I have a dog. Some people might include, so this is, not necessary, but some people like to include this because maybe it will make them look better than another person who doesn't have this kind of information, right? It's like, okay, both of these people went to the same school, they have the same experience, they have the same, everything's the same, but this person has a dog. So sometimes people include this, and sometimes it's interesting because, for example, I had a teacher apply for a job a long time ago at my offline school, and she drew a cartoon picture of herself. It was like a fun picture of herself as a cartoon on her resume. And this looked different from everything else. Her resume was in different colors, and she had this cartoon, and it was very clear. It looked great. She spent some time designing this thing, and I chose her because I thought that it was very creative. And she ended up being a good teacher and a good person to work with. And yeah, so sometimes you can show that you're more creative. So this is different, I think, in the American perspective from some other places where you have to be very professional and you have to be very strict on your resume or CV, right? It of course depends on the job. If you're applying to some government position, then drawing a cartoon picture of yourself might not be the best strategy, but who knows? So other things that we need to include in our resume or our CV. Usually there are some extra documents that we might include. So the most common extra document that we include with a CV or with a resume is something that we call a cover letter. A cover letter. The cover letter is basically, it's usually one page or less than one page, like half of a page. It's like one paragraph or one, two, three paragraphs usually. It explains why you're sending them the resume. It explains who you're sending it to and why you're sending it. So if you have a very short resume or short CV, then maybe this isn't necessary. Or maybe the employer, maybe the job or the university or whoever, maybe they ask you for this. Maybe they say you need to include a cover letter. But if you have a very short resume, you could just put a paragraph at the top of the resume to explain this, right? You can include it in the resume itself. But if you have a bigger CV or resume, or maybe it's a more prestigious job or higher level job, then maybe you need to include a cover letter that explains who you're sending it to, why you're sending it, and all of this, like an introduction to your CV. Another kind of document that people usually include is references. So sometimes this is included with each job, like I gave an example earlier. But sometimes this is maybe a different page or a completely different document, a list of people who, if I call them, they will say that you are the person that you say that you are, that you have the experience that you say that you have. Right? So this is references. If I call them, if I write them, then they can confirm that you are really the person that you've said on paper. We might just say references or reference sheet, something like this. Okay, another big thing that I noticed when I went to Russia and had a business there and looked at resumes and CVs, I noticed everybody put a picture in their resume. This was really different because in the United States, usually people don't put a picture. And maybe now it's okay to put a picture, but if you do, it's usually a small picture with your name and your address and your phone number in the top corner. It's just small but in some countries, it's typical to put a really big professional photo of yourself at the top of your resume or your CV, right? So typically in most, I would say that in most English-speaking countries, like in the United States, in the UK, and in Australia, you don't usually put a photo. And in some situations, like more professional jobs, including a photo, people might actually think that it's unprofessional. That's how I felt when I first looked at a lot of ones when I had my business in Russia. Then I had to understand that there was a cultural difference about CVs and resumes. But yes, there is a cultural difference here. So it's better not to put a photo, or if you think that it's necessary, then put a small one in the top corner. Great. Okay. Next, there's some funny things that we do when we write resumes. For example, we don't use pronouns. There's some words that we don't usually use. Like, let's say that I'm writing my resume or my CV, and so I've got, education is my section of my resume, and I say Salve Regina University, and I write the year, right? I write like I don't even remember what year that was, 2007 through 2009. Maybe I should include the month also, right? And then maybe I need to write something about what I did here. So I could say studied international relations. Studied international relations. I will not write I studied international relations. Instead, I will just write studied. Like maybe I have a dash over here, a hyphen, right? Studied international relations. I don't know, best student in the class, or whatever. And I can write more information, right? And I wouldn't write I was the best student in the class. I would just write was best student in the class, or without a verb, best student in the class. So usually on resumes and CVs we write like this. It's understood who we're talking about, so we just use past tense verbs. Mm-hmm. So let's imagine that we're describing something. Everybody already knows who we're describing or what we're describing. Let's say that we're describing McDonald's. We might say, is known around the world. This is passive voice, right? Is known around the world. We could say opened over 100,000 locations. Right? We could say launched 20 types of burgers. So if we were writing a resume for McDonald's, then for the company McDonald's, then we could say that these are some things that they've done, right? So we use past tense to talk about the things that are finished, the achievements. We could use passive voice to say that we have something right now that's useful, right? Like maybe you are the #1 biologist in Europe, and you can say is recognized as the #1 biologist in Europe, or just recognized as, right? We could even just use things like winner of 2019 award. Right? We could use something like this. like winner of 2019 award for best French fries, for example. Yeah, so we write more like this when we're writing resumes and CVs. I hope this helps give you an example. Great. Another thing that's important to do is to include very specific information about the achievement. So sometimes people will write something like, I improved their sales. What did you do at this company? Improved sales. Well, what does that mean? Got one sale? Right. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. We need numbers. It's important to include numbers when we're talking about our achievements, so that the person can really see how good it was, right? Can really see, especially if it's about something in marketing, sales, and business, something connected to that, then you should include the numbers that show how good it was. Even if those numbers, you still have to check that the numbers were true, right? But at least that should make sense in the CV. And maybe then you should explain why the numbers were so high or low, or why you decided to share these numbers, right? Cool. Okay. There's also a lot of business related or professional related words that we should use instead of other words. Like we could say to be in charge of something, right? To be in charge of something. This means that you are the boss of this thing. You have responsibility. You must do something connected to this. You're in charge of it. You're the main person. So we could say, I was in charge of a 20-person team. Right? I was in charge of a 20-person team. Remember the hyphen, 20-person, because we're using the number 20 as an adjective, like an adjective here. 20-person about the team. And person, not people, not persons, just person. 20-person team. Yeah, so we could say I was in charge of a 20-person team. We could say I trained this group of people. I directed this department. Right? So we can tell them what our responsibility was. Right? Directed, trained, in charge of, responsible for. These phrases, all of these phrases are useful. If we say improved, it doesn't really tell us that the person had responsibility, or that the person, it doesn't tell us anything, right? So, great. What about grammar? Is grammar important in a CV or a resume? Very, very important. So, I don't know if you already use this tool or not, and they didn't pay me to say this. So, Grammarly. Have you ever heard of a tool called Grammarly? I suggest it. You've probably used Microsoft Word before. If you've used Microsoft Word when you're typing a document, if you've used this program, then you know about the feature called spell check. Spell check is, so you're writing a document and it looks at your document and tells you if you spelled a word wrong, or sometimes it tells you that the grammar is wrong in the sentence, or the comma is in the wrong place, or right. And native speakers use this too. and a lot. But you can only do that in a document with Microsoft Word. With Grammarly, you can do this when you're writing on the internet. You can do this when you're writing an email. You can do this when you're writing a message. You can do this when you're writing in other places. So anybody who's watching, maybe you want to try to download Grammarly and see how it works, because first of all, what you write will be more correct. And second of all, you will learn your mistakes because it's correcting you. And then you'll think, oh, why is that a mistake? And then you'll try to learn the rule why that was a mistake, right? So that next time you can write without making that mistake. So it's a really good thing to use.